Hey, everybody. Thrilled to welcome Sophie Goldschmidt to our show today. She's the sitting CEO at US Ski and Snowboard. She's had that role for the last 5 years, and we're going to learn a lot about not only US Ski and Snowboard and how they fared coming out of the recently held Olympics in Milano Cortina, but also about the future and a little bit about how Sophie got to where she is. So, Sophie, can't thank you enough. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So we always start this with kind of the obvious question. The name of the show is The Best Boss Ever. So none of us ever gets to where we are, particularly in a CEO position. Your second one, by the way. So the question is, who was the best boss or the best leader or the best influencer or manager or coach, or, you frame it for us. Who was that? What did you learn, and what of those learnings have you taken with you throughout your career to date?
Yeah, that's a tough and easy one to answer at the same time. I've been incredibly fortunate to work for several great bosses and leaders, and I've learned from really all of them, everyone that's ever managed me. But I think there are a few that stand out. It's tough to pick one because I think at different stages of your career, you need different kind of guidance and support and mentorship and a kick up the backside from time to time as well. So if I go back to sort of earlier in my career, I would definitely note Larry Scott, who was CEO of the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA Tour at that time. It became the Sony Ericsson WTA Tour while I was there. And I worked very closely with him on all the sort of marketing, sales and strategic areas. He's someone that I'm still in touch with. I still consider him a mentor. He stayed at the WTA a little bit after I left and has gone on to other things since then. But he really was very visionary with how he thought we could evolve women's tennis. It was during his tenure that we restructured the circuit. We came up with sort of clearer and more defined different levels within the organization. We really partnered with the athletes in a much more constructive and collaborative way. We signed the first ever title partnership of the WTA Tour, which was the biggest deal ever done in women's sports at that time. So it really was at a time of massive change. And so being sort of a right hand for him in a lot of those areas was an amazing learning experience. And just the respect that he treated all his employees with, but me, the trust that I felt, and how, quite frankly, he would allow me to be in situations that I probably didn't have the experience to be in, but he felt I had some kind of good instincts and a work ethic that warranted giving me a chance. So yeah, learned a huge amount from him. Then from there, went to work for the NBA, worked with several great leaders, but David Stern and Adam Silver definitely stand out. I was very fortunate. When I started, I was more in a marketing partnerships role, and then I moved into an international role to oversee Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And they were both very passionate about the international potential for the NBA and really leaned into that area of the organization. And so I had, a lot of direct interaction with them, was able to participate in meetings, hear from them about their vision and strategy directly. And they just had already achieved and been part of so much that had really transformed the NBA into the powerhouse that it is today. So they set incredibly high standards. I have to say, having worked at the NBA, I feel a little bit qualified as a lawyer as well. Very good at protecting their rights and IP and everything that comes with that. Very, high standards and so much expertise across all the different areas. So it really kind of trained me to just think differently and hold myself and, our department to just a completely different standard. It was a tough place to work, but very enjoyable. And I was very motivated by being in that environment. And then the last person I would highlight would actually be my current boss, who I consider sort of the chairman of our board at US Ski and Snowboard, Kip Nelson, who's been involved with our organization for a long time, has been chairman for the last 7 years, actually is coming into his last year, which is bittersweet. Mm. And I've really, really enjoyed working with him. Sort of the mutual trust and respect we have, not having to overthink and overposition things before having a conversation, knowing that he's going to hold me to account and he'll be my biggest critic and my even bigger cheerleader and supporter as well, is just a really nice balance to have. And we've been through some challenging times and a lot of successful ones since I've been working with him. And just his balance for life in general, he's absolutely someone that works hard and plays hard. And right. I think to have that balance is actually quite rare these days.
Well, I've never met Kip Nelson. I've heard his name for years and years and years. If memory serves, or if I got the data right, he's a Sun Valley, Idaho resident, maybe still. So is his departure self-inflicted? That's not the right term, but is he choosing to exit, or
No,
is this by
I
some
think,
sort of ordinance?
yeah, no, we have term limits.
I see.
So there's an 8-year term on the chair of our governance board. And so he's sadly terming out. But look, he can stay involved in an ex officio capacity. He's still a trustee with our foundation. And yeah, look, I think I'll stay in touch with him forever, I hope, if he'll put up with me.
Oh, well.
But yeah, he actually spends a lot of time in Europe now, more in Europe than he does in the US, but yeah, is a big proponent of supporting our athletes and really doing things the right way. And yeah, super smart. Has had a very impressive investment and financial sort of background, so has fantastic experience.
Right, Goldman Sachs, if memory serves. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
back in the day. So you mentioned this word a couple of times, and it's actually one of the golden threads of leadership as we grow in positions, are conveyed more responsibilities, and it's the word you used is trust. So if you took a step back, can you frame how important the trust factor is up and down the food chain, so to speak, in a business leadership environment?
Yeah, I think it's everything. Without that, leading and having responsibility is really stressful because you don't know who's on your team, who's not, who you can really rely on to do the right thing and have your back and lead the organization in a way that want. Yeah, sometimes it can take a long time to build. Sometimes, depending on the personality fit and the situation, I feel like you can build trust very quickly as well. But to me, it's absolutely imperative to have a highly functioning leadership team and organization.
No question about that. So I noted you have an athletic background, and I rather think because of your collegiate tennis career might have been the impetus to join the WTA out of the box. How important, Sophie, for you was your athletic career in informing and guiding you and sort of instilling, if you will, a discipline and a sort of a I can do attitude about the entire business trajectory you've been on for the last couple decades?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, it's given me so much. I mean, if I take a step back, I wouldn't have ended up in the US if I, wasn't a half decent tennis player. That gave me the chance to come to the US on a tennis scholarship. If I hadn't come to the US, I don't think I would have had the opportunities in sports that I've had. The UK is much smaller. It's not as progressive. I didn't really know what the sports marketing, sports business world really was all about when I came to college, but I was lucky to get that opportunity, which led to me doing a master's. As part of a master's program, I had to do an internship. What a chore, but a great opportunity. And I got an internship at Adidas, or Adidas, as we would say in the States. While I was there, a job opened up and that got me on the way. So look, very fortunate to have that kind of turn of events, but it sort of broadened my eyes to what could be possible and that I really could marry my passion with kind of more of a business career. But I think, the fact that I had an internship that turned into a job, I think was enabled by hard work, discipline, showing up, being great at taking feedback and being, a team player. Again, initially, tennis is a very individual sport when I was growing up. For the first time, I played on a team when I went to college, and I loved that. I loved being I was sort of team member, and also my nickname was coach and scout because I was always scouting out the opponents and trying to give people tips because you were able to coach your college teammates during the matches, and I loved that happening to me as well. So I think that sort of teamwork definitely then has helped me in later life. But look, I don't know exactly what the stats are, but college athletes or professional athletes can often go on to do quite well in business. I'm not saying I've done well, but those attributes have definitely, I think, been a great training ground in so many ways for what I had to deal with and what I've done in my career.
Right. Well, you're not the first to say it and you won't be the last, but so I'll say it for you. You've had an amazing career and you are in a role right now that sort of transcends virtually all of which you sort of came from. Because in truth, while you sit on top of a national governing body and, responsible for not only elite athletes across a number of disciplines, but also revenue production, you have a board. So you've got all these disparate elements and you've obviously managed them quite well over the last 5 years. But before we dive into US Ski and Snowboard, because there's a lot to dive into, a little bit about, so federation or league, right? You spent a bit of time at rugby, right? That was as big as rugby is worldwide, it's not sort of caught fire in the US quite yet, but like the rugby sevens help on the Olympic program. And I know that there's an emerging Major League Rugby league. It's still, I would say, in its early days, but talk to us a little bit about your role internationally in rugby, and then you sort of migrated into the World Surfing League, which is, it's a league, it's a professional league, it's sort of not a national governing body per se, but you had to sit alongside the governing bodies that are responsible for surfing on you.
Yeah, so I feel since early on, probably ever since Adidas actually, which is more a purely business run commercial organization with sort of public markets and different shareholders to sort of service. But ever since I worked for the WTA, I've worked for the most part for organizations with multiple stakeholders, from an athlete perspective, from the different sort of national governing bodies, whether it's international federations, grand slams, tournaments. In rugby, it's teams, it's World Rugby, etc. And I pride myself on building relationships. I enjoy building relationships. It's something that I would choose to spend my time on, but I think it's been really beneficial from a business perspective. And when you talk about national governing bodies, it really is a confluence of those. We're there to serve others and to bring the ecosystem together and driving towards hopefully a common goal. And sometimes figuring out what that common goal is can be challenging because you're serving sort of the best in the game, but elite athletes and top teams and the grassroots, people picking up a rugby ball or getting on a surfboard or putting on skis and snowboard for the first time. But, I love that complexity and how ultimately sort of powers of persuasion and really trying to rally folks around a common objective. Look, if you can get people rowing in the same direction, my word, you can really impact change. And so certainly rugby was my first foray into that. We had quite a big board there. I was the first female on it and actually really the first standing executive, because as I joined the RFU, the CEO had been fired the day before and most of the board had been forced to resign. So we literally sort of started from scratch. It wasn't quite the start I was expecting.
Wow.
But because of some bad behavior, the full board was forced to resign and we sort of rebuilt it. And it was fascinating getting to see just how you could pull the different levers to sort of build that confidence and really reestablish what historically had been a very strong brand, but had been completely ruined. And, that snowball effect, momentum can really mean that you can change things quite quickly when you get things going. And then if I take that to my situation today, we have a board of almost 30, a governance board, we have a trustee foundation board of 85, and then we have many other sort of complex stakeholder groups and 12 different sports that we're overseeing. So my experience in rugby and along the way with the MBA, working in surfing, etc., I think has definitely held me in good stead for a role like this. But look, constantly learning and want to keep getting better. But I do feel that on a regular basis, I feel like I'm in situations that I've kind of seen a different version of before, which is quite reassuring. And as some wise person told me, look, experience is no use to you unless you can see those trends and tap into those situations you've been in before and learn from those so your instincts are sort of applied the right way. And so I try and do that when I can.
Well, for sure. And I mean, the more experience you have, if you will, the more movie clips you see. And then when you see a familiar movie clip, you can say, hey, I've seen that movie before. This is what I'm seeing. This is how we solved, or are the options to solve.
Yeah.
And that's really what the experience base builds. And, you just lay plank after plank after plank in the platform and here you are. Right. So one of the things I took note of while you were at the World Surfing League is there was seemingly a gap in the prize money awards between the men's side and the women's side. And you are credited as the executive who figured out how to equalize the prize money distributions on both the men and the women's side, or the women's side catching up with the men, if you will. And that has been across the spectrum of women's sports from the earliest days, one of the really significant issues, the equalization of prize money. So share with us a little bit about what you saw, what you found, and how you solved that problem.
Yeah, well, look, I'd seen it before a little bit again about tapping into experience when I was at the WTA. One of the other things that Larry really led was the implementation of equal prize money at the Grand Slams and the higher tier events where the men and women were playing together. So I got a first-hand seat. I was very involved in working with the top players to sort of build the narrative and pressure in the right way to enable that to happen, which, yeah, I'm incredibly proud of. And I think then joining the World Surf League, look, to be fair, the path had been laid for a while. We had very supportive owners who really believed in equality. The level of women surfing was, while I was there, going to a whole nother level. They were surfing breaks, getting attention, driving a lot of the fandom in the sport in a way that hadn't happened before because of the way the tour had evolved and developed. And so it was absolutely the right time to be able to implement it. But it took a supportive ownership group because it is an investment. We were sort of paying it forward for all the pioneers that had come before. Also doing it at a time where the women and men were both very supportive of each other. I remember when we shared with the men that we were going to be doing this, they were kind of high-fiving too. They're like, absolutely, which is really cool. I'm not sure that would have been the case in a lot of sports, but it was in surfing. Again, the tours are traveling together. They're competing in the same breaks. They're seeing, the progression in women's surfing. So yeah, it was a very proud moment. I feel very fortunate to have been there, to have been able to lead such a key decision. And I think it really, took surfing to a new level and helped to position them as leaders in a really sort of fundamental area for women's sports and sports more broadly.
It's a really important thing. I mean, I'll just spend a second here. I'm going to date myself, a big chunk of the 80s and early 90s in the sport of triathlon. I co-founded USA Triathlon, co-founded what is now World Triathlon, was the International Triathlon Union. And from the get-go, we staged competitions at what is now the Olympic distance, and we sort of codified that in 1984, 1,500 meters swim, 40K bike, 10K run. But from the very first event we put on in 1982, we awarded equal prize money to men and women across the board. And that was a little bit early, if you will, in the whole pantheon of things. But the point you just made about how supportive the men were of the women getting up to par was exactly the same thing we experienced through the 80s. And the camaraderie, because they all competed on the same courses at the same time, although they started at different stages, was really gratifying to see. So I love that equal prize money story. So you run World Surf League, and there's a moment in time, kind of probably COVID-ish, where what happened. Share with us the transition and what got you excited to join US Ski and Snowboard as a CEO, and how the departure and the transition out of a CEO role at WSL and into a CEO role at US Ski and Snowboard was affected.
Yeah, so it happened quite naturally. I joined the WSL with a clear remit to professionalize the organization, commercially make it much more fit for purpose, and to drive a lot more revenue, and to really sort of reimagine the marketing and positioning of the sport. And yeah, incredibly proud of what we achieved during my tenure. And I feel definitely took it to the next level. And coming out of that role, I actually thought I wanted to shift into slightly more entrepreneurial space, and so decided to join several early stage companies in sports, technology, and health and wellness. And I thought I would enjoy the variety. I'm someone that likes to be learning. I'm a very curious person. And so to take my experience, but to apply it to different organizations and go what you sort of call plural, I thought would be a good fit. After a few months, I realized actually I really missed the full-on immersion of making a deeper impact day in, day out. And so while the variety was good, it sort of was also quite hard to manage because I wanted to dive in and be really deep with every organization. Well, A, they didn't necessarily want that, and B, there's not enough time in the day to do that for multiple organizations. So I sort of realized that, getting immersed in a full-time opportunity. You can still do board roles on the side, but have, your main sort of focus was the path I wanted to go down. And so, look, I was fortunate to have a few opportunities come up, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do sort of a different version, but sort of more of the same in sport, or to move into more media, tech, and sort of health and wellness sort of sectors. But I kept being drawn back to some sports roles, and this one in particular, where I felt snow sports was right for disruption. I loved the idea of getting closer to teams and athletes again, because as an NGB, unlike a lot of NGBs, we kind of fully oversee all the training and competition for all of our athletes day in, day out. It's not just sort of world championships and Olympics. In snow sports, you compete for your national team all year round. And so we have a chief of sport that's overseeing all of that programming and everything that goes into managing that. So to get closer to the high performance side and really trying to help athletes achieve their dreams more directly was a new challenge to me. I've worked with athletes my whole career, but they're more independent contractors, or they were managed by separate teams, like with the NBA or in rugby, etc. They're playing for pro teams most of the time. And then combining that with what was more, I would say, sort of my bread and butter, but a different version of sort of the traditional commercial business and all the operating areas of an organization. So driving commercial revenue, optimizing broadcast rights, building a fan base, managing all of the administrative, safe sport, and other sort of legal sides and all the other stakeholders. So it was the right opportunity at the right time. It was also appealing to me to move to a mountain town. I'd been to Park City to ski, had a few friends there. Post-COVID, or actually it was still during COVID, so towards the end of COVID, that seemed like a good idea. And Park City is amazing. It's also, as far as I can tell, the most accessible ski resort in the world. So I travel a lot, and it's half an hour from Salt Lake City Airport, which is major hub and an international route. So yeah, sort of that lifestyle decision was appealing as well. But I kind of relished the challenge of learning a new sport and really digging into an organization like US Ski and Snowboard. And it's been amazing. It's definitely exceeded expectations. There are many more opportunities than I was expecting. It's the most entrepreneurial role I've had as well, where we have very good governance and a very engaged board. They really empower the executive in the right way to lead the charge and sort of drive the change and innovation that's needed, which is really refreshing. I've really loved that. So yeah, hopefully I can continue here for a while, because I certainly feel there's a lot more for us to achieve.
Well, right, and we'll get to this in a second, but you've got a massive goal on the horizon 8 years from now called Salt Lake City 2034. We'll get to that in a sec, but it's so refreshing to hear you talk about your board and the governance giving you the license and the encouragement and the room to move, because at their core, national governing bodies are political organizations. And when you have that political overlay, it can sometimes be quite difficult, especially if a sport goes awry or leadership goes awry. You just mentioned you walked into rugby union, and the day you walked in, everybody left because there was bad behavior, quote unquote, going on. So that said, you are physically in Park City, arguably, and I think you're probably quite right, the most accessible major league ski resort in the world, given it's 30 minutes from an international airport, and a sizable one at that, in a growing community that loves sport. I mean, leveraged from 2002 all the way up through and now. But what I'm guessing a lot of people really don't understand is the building and infrastructure at the center of excellence where your offices are, what happens at that building, and how it is literally a hub and a galvanizing center for all of your athletes, all of your coaches, and they're sort of moving in and around, in and out of Park City, and particularly the facilities that you have in town. So share with us a little bit about your view on how that has led to what I will call improved athlete performance, and the, I guess, ways and means, infrastructure, and the tools that these athletes now have access to, from nutrition, strength training, rehabilitation, should there be an industry, the whole kit.
Yeah, no, well articulated. And like you said, we do have an amazing center of excellence powered by iFit here in Park City, which really is our hub of activity. And almost 70% of our athletes are now based in the sort of greater Park City, Salt Lake City area. And that's been a conscious effort. So post-COVID, to be honest, it wasn't such a hub because people couldn't travel and they sort of went back to their home bases to train in the off season. So our season, the competitive season, starts in October, finishes at the beginning of April, but the prep period is as important. So the pre-season training starts in April and finishes sort of early October. And a lot of that is what you call dry land training. So for the first 2 to 3 months, they're here getting stronger, rehabbing as needed, a lot of hiking, biking, a lot of really concentrated strength work, and all the mobility and everything else that you would expect. And we have the best place in the world to do that here in Park City, in addition to, training at altitude, which helps as well. And then they go down to snow sort of starting for the most part in August. They're all scattered across the Southern Hemisphere at the moment, in Argentina, Chile, New Zealand, Australia, and a few other random places, chasing snow and getting kind of the reps in. But for us, culturally and from a high performance perspective, to have as many of our athletes coming to the Center of Excellence on a regular basis is really, really important. It's important culturally. The different teams get to interact with each other, not just men and women, but the different sports, cross country, snowboard, free ski, alpine, whatever it might be, and really learn and push each other. And when you're in that environment, good things happen from a performance perspective. Obviously, they need their space. They need their time to rest and not to be around each other all the time, because during the season, they're also traveling together. But we've been really pleased how it's attracting more and more athletes to want to move to the area and be here during the off season. And then during the season, they'll come back, they'll check in, they'll get their strength work. If they get injured, it's definitely a big hub for us from a rehab perspective, but actually it's busier during the spring through early fall than it is in the winter. But yeah, I think
because they're all traveling all over the world on World Cup schedules and all that stuff.
Especially, some of the schedules, they're literally competing every single week. So yeah, look, it's a great, I think, differentiator for us as well. We have the best sports medicine, high performance staff in the world, and then amazing equipment. Actually, iFit, who are the presenting partner of the center, are also a key partner of ours. So we have the best gear across all of their portfolio companies, and the athletes see that, they benefit it. And if they want to be the best in the world, those are the environments they want to be in. And especially the younger ones, we have a rookie camp, which is one of my favorite weeks of the year, when we have all the young ones come in to learn what we're all about. They're all terrified and nervous, kind of being around all these amazing athletes for the first time, but making sure they learn out the gate what it takes to be an athlete, how they can best improve mentally, physically, and otherwise to optimize their potential, and sort of getting them into the system and understanding all the resources that they have to really help them, achieve their dreams.
For sure.
So yeah, it's pretty full on, but I think in a really great way.
Well, I'm sure there are lots of component parts to getting, if you will, the athletes from, I'm not going to say cradle to grave, but cradle to Salt Lake City, cradle to Park City. But you just talked about the rookie camp. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on understanding the infrastructure on how an individual athlete goes through a sequence to get to be invited into the rookie camp. We just know it's there. And generally speaking, Sophie, the focus is on, the elite competitors. It just is. Whether it's the Olympic Games or the World Cup schedule or the FIS World Championships or whatever, it's always going to be that. So you assumed the role as CEO, and I want to say almost exactly 5 years ago, right? Like September 21?
November of 21. Yes, right. Towards the end of COVID. So 4.5.
Which is like months before an Olympic Games.
Yeah. I was still drinking out the fire hose.
I'm sure you were. So recognizing that you barely had your feet on the ground, you go to Beijing, and I think it was still a little COVID-ish, if memory serves. There were still some restrictions, so all that stuff going on. You come out of Beijing, you take a deep breath, and now you got 4 years to Cortina. So what did you put in motion when you got back from Beijing?
Yeah, so Beijing really was a learning experience. I hadn't been in a role like this at a games, and to your point, it was not a normal games. There were no spectators. It was quite restrictive where you could go. When you got to Beijing, you couldn't leave your room for 3 days because you had to have X number of COVID tests. I hadn't even had a chance to meet most of our athletes and staff because we weren't allowed to be in the same areas. Actually, once you got to Beijing and were allowed in the bubble, there was more freedom than you would normally get in an Olympic. It was just dead because there were no fans there. So yes, I definitely took as much out of that as I could. Just, I'd been to Olympic Games as sort of a fan and guest before, but not in this capacity. But, again, because it was so different, it was preparation, but it kind of wasn't. I mean, Italy was another version of it again, and a very, very different experience, which I think will hold us and me in better stead, for the next one. But, there were clear learnings. There were changes that I wanted to make from a athlete perspective, from a coaching standpoint, some of the preparation. There are also a lot of things that were working really well that, I took as things that we actually wanted to further cement and actually make sure they were applied across all the different teams. So, you're constantly tweaking and evolving. I mean, competitive sport is as competitive as any sector gets. So unless you're moving forward and progressing pretty aggressively, you're moving backwards in my mind. So where you can look and learn from other sports and the marginal gains and apply that to a team, but also all our sports are individual at the end of the day, sorry. And so I think sort of sussing out that dynamic. But look, for us, every year needs to build on the other and the prior year. While yes, we have these high points with the Olympics and Paralympics every 4 years, we still have, world championships in those in between years. We have World Cups going on every weekend during the season. And for an athlete, ultimately, who decides or what determines the best athlete is who wins the globe. That's who is most consistent across a season, rather than a one performance event. Right. And so I feel if week in, week out, we're doing the right things, we're seeing the progress, we're getting more World Cup podiums, we're getting more young athletes coming through, we're winning the Nations Cup or doing better in the Nations Cup, which determines who is the best country in a particular discipline, then the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games should take care of themselves if you're putting the right structure and kind of processes in place. The old adage that, you should treat every event or match or game the same. When you start treating them very differently is when the pressure, can take different forms and athletes maybe feel like they're not prepared. So I think it's kind of a balance of the two. But certainly had notebooks of learnings coming out of Milano Cortina, which I hope will help us do even better in France. And then, as you know, we have home games in 34, which is just such an incredible opportunity.
It's so great. I want to get there in a second because we're going to sort of conclude with that. So you've got a very capable, I'll say staff, but group of colleagues that are responsible for, from chief of sport to coaching to training to all of the things that you just referenced that gets your elite crews of athletes ready to compete week in and week out throughout the winter season, and then start training was the weekend after the winter season is over. But that, I think, if I could separate it into two halves, the athlete and performance half and the revenue generation, media, broadcast rights, creative approaches that you have taken to grow the sport economically, not just in terms of athlete performance. And I did take note that from 22 to 26, you nearly or perhaps even more than doubled the top line revenue in that quadrangle. So that quadrennial, apologies. So give us the formula, kiddo. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, look, I've been really pleased with the progress we've made on and off the snow. I sort of very simplistically split our organization into two, the snow and athletic part, and that's both on and off snow, I should say, and one is as important as the other, and then the business side, which is more, the administrative side, all of the infrastructure we have to have in place to manage all of these sports across the whole country from cradle to grave, as you rightly stated earlier, and then the revenue engine that needs to sort of turbocharge that. Because while it's not completely linear, in general, if you've got the right culture and the right high performing environment, the more money you can invest leads to success. It is a pretty direct line.
Yeah.
So for me coming in, and I can assure you I was not hired for my skiing or snowboarding ability. So I think they were hoping that I could impact the revenue and marketing. And yeah, look, we've had a really good run. We have over doubled our revenue in the last 4 years. And I still feel there's a lot more growth to come. And there's a little bit of a playbook there. I mean, it was about repositioning what we stood for. We have the most incredible athletes, a fantastic, very desirable demographic and cohort of supporters and fans and participants, which is actually a lot bigger than people realize. It rivals as many people play tennis or golf, but with a deep passion and connection to our sports. And then for me, a key part of evolving what we were offering was having more major moments in the US, both through broadcast and content, and also through World Cup and other big events, because the US is very spoiled for choice. You have so many major sporting events in the US where you're seeing the best in the world compete live in your time zone. And people still thought of us as just being sports that you would get up in the middle of the night to watch happen in Europe, with a few events in the US. So we've almost tripled the number of events that we have in the US on the World Cup circuit. And that provides home field advantage. It provides much more live broadcast exposure. It provides opportunities for brands to activate, fans to engage. It really ticks so many boxes and helps also to elevate the profile of our resorts. I think a combination of that and really investing in sort of the marketing machine behind our athletes has helped us to become commercially a lot more interesting. And I think also what really struck me, which is one of the reasons I referred to earlier, that we can be really entrepreneurial. And this is the most entrepreneurial role I have had, which isn't how you typically refer to NGBs.
Right.
But we uniquely control a lot of our ecosystem. So when you partner with us, you can work with the athletes, you can work with our events. We produce the broadcast feed. We control the social channels. We have amazing relationships with all these different stakeholders, and you can do that all through us. You don't need to work with a players association and do a separate broadcast deal and then a separate team deal. So I think making ourselves really flexible and user friendly for brands too is kind of a relief. It makes us sort of more efficient to work with as well. So yeah, super proud and pleased of the commercial growth, and it's across sponsorship, across broadcast. We've also seen significant growth across our foundation. Philanthropy is a big part of what we do because we don't receive any government funding, so we're very, very grateful to a lot of very generous donors who invest in our athletes too. And I think, look, some of that extra investment is what has led to a couple of record years that we've had on the snow. But it's also, thanks to a huge amount of hard work from our chief of sport and Patty and our coaches, who have also evolved and improved the environment and the culture that we're building and how we're working with athletes day in, day out on an individual basis, while also making sure that the team is elevating too.
Right.
So it's really a combination of the two.
So 4 years from now, France, the French Alps, which is sort of God's country, if you will, certainly in Europe. And you've got a trajectory and your athletes are on track each year, week in and week out, as you just mentioned, prepping for what's coming in 4 years' time in France. And that's going to take care of itself. But I want to spend a few minutes on one, I think, of the most exciting things in sport in the US, notwithstanding LA 28, less than 2 years away from when we're recording this, but that is the Olympics coming back to Salt Lake City in 2034. You obviously have a prominent role in the, what I'll call steering committee, for lack of a better term. It's probably named officially something else, but share with us what you see, what role you're currently playing, and where and how you see the next 8 years evolving. And I dare say, literally turning Salt Lake City into something that it isn't right now in terms of global sport.
Yeah, so when I took on this role, I didn't really understand how real it was that we could be hosting another home winter Olympic and Paralympic Games. And quite soon into my tenure, I realized it was a possibility. And I did whatever I could to help with that bid, which, by the way, was very light touch. People have been working on it for decades. But to me, it was that important. There is nothing more transformative for our organization in sports than having another home games. And so very fortunately, we were awarded it in Paris 2024. And actually to get it that far in advance too is a major opportunity. Initially, I wanted it in 2030, but actually it gives us just a longer horizon to really build towards this North Star moment. And so, yes, look, for our organization, it's incredibly significant. We will have between sort of 60 and 70% of winter team USA will be made up of our athletes. And I also have the opportunity to sit on the organizing committee board as well. So sort of see it from both vantage points, and definitely want to be doing everything I can and we can as an organization to optimize the experience and the build up. And we, I feel like I was here in 2002 living in Park City. I mean, people talk about it all the time. It was the most amazing, life-changing event most people that attended have been to. And so I can already feel the energy. I mean, I felt, even to be honest, compared to Italy, which was fantastic in the spring, but there's more excitement here about 34 than there was in Italy. So I think that's just how big it can be in my mind. So yeah, very motivated by it. I mean, it's, I think, certainly energizing the athletes. A lot of the ones on our team now will still be competing in, it's less than 8 years' time. And we absolutely will not miss out on the opportunity to help this take our sports and performance to a whole new level.
Well, it's super exciting, and obviously so much more to come over the next 7.5 to 8 years. We'll all keep a keen eye on it, because one could almost say, given the earlier parts of our conversation, that a case could be made to have Park City and Salt Lake City become an every 1 or 2 Olympic game permanent home for the winter side, right? I mean, it's that good. It's that good.
Yeah. I hope so. We hope. There's rumors of a rotation every 3 to 5 games. And I mean, this is a no-brainer. I mean, we're so well prepared. We could literally host the Olympics and Paralympics next spring. I mean, it's the best legacy, I think, in, the games sort of history. The facilities are all still working. It's where we train. And just the energy from this local community, the fact it doesn't need a lot of government investment, which obviously gets a lot of scrutiny, understandably so in this day and age.
Yep, right.
So yeah, there's a lot of pluses. I feel like I work for the Utah Tourism Board the way I
well, in part you do. I mean, listen, in part you do. I mean,
yeah.
Even notwithstanding 2034, the location, as we talked about, the hub of all things US Ski and Snowboard does, literally being 30 minutes or less from downtown Salt Lake City. Yeah, you've got a lot of stakeholders, and shoot, Sophie, so far so good. This is really fun to hear.
Great.
So we've got a couple of minutes left. Ask each of our guests the same 3 questions. So I'm a huge female singer-songwriter, musical artist fan. So the question is, the best live concert you ever attended where a female singer-songwriter or a female-led band was the head?
Yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence. There are 2. So the first one that really stands out, and she was a big hero of mine, was a Tina Turner concert I went to in Dallas when I was in college. She was incredible. And I was a huge fan already. I loved her music. But to see her perform, I mean, talk about energy. We'll come back to that, I think, with your last question. But yeah, she blew my mind. The other one I have to give a little shout out for is Adele. I remember seeing her at the O2 in London, and just her command of the stage, quite a simple performance compared to Tina Turner. But also I just remember her personality. I mean, she was hilarious. Banter in between the songs, having the most incredible voice. But those 2 stand out to me.
2 winners, no doubt. Next question, and we all make mistakes all the time. In fact, one could argue you learn far more from the mistakes you made than the successes you had. So this question is a little bit of an oxymoron. Your favorite mistake. That's the mistake that stands out in your mind, that you made, you recovered from, and you learned from.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to give you 2 quick answers. The first is I can be too trusting of people. I think I'm wired to think the good in people, which I think is actually a great trait. But I think sometimes in business in particular, you need to be a little bit more discerning and have people earn that trust and sort of build that relationship over time. Don't necessarily go in maybe quite as naively sometimes. So I've learned from that a few times. And then another mistake is taking on too much. I'm not always disciplined enough at saying no to things, and have sometimes been caught out by possibly spreading myself or our organization too thin. Look, it's a nice problem to have when you have too many opportunities, but what's urgent versus what's important, I think, is something I have to constantly remind myself of.
2 good ones. Two good ones. And I dare say hugely successful leaders probably suffer from both of those. Last one. This is my favorite one. This is your favorite word. It's sort of a touchstone or a North Star for you. What is it and why?
Optimism, sort of that can-do attitude that anything is possible, which takes a lot of energy, sort of giving a hint to my Tina Turner point earlier. But I'm a very glass half full, hopeful person, and I pride myself on being optimistic. Look, you have to be realistic and pragmatic as well, but that's the attitude I like to see in others and hope that I portray as well.
Well, that's really good because I would answer it very similarly. So we're sort of glasses in arms, if you will, half full glasses in arms. Sophie, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This has been terrific, and our audience is going to learn so much from you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.